What's up guys, welcome back to Core CSS Mastery. We're going to be talking about styling replaced elements. A replaced element in CSS is one that we can't directly control with CSS. And examples of replaced elements include images, videos, iframes, and embed tags. If you think, for example, about an element such as a paragraph in HTML, we can use CSS to customize how that paragraph appears. We can change the font, we can change the visibility, we can change the color, we can set the background on the element. But if you look at this image of a tree we have in a HTML document, we can't really do anything to change that with CSS. It's in .png format. CSS doesn't deal with that type of thing. It's not like we could write a CSS selector for this tree and change the color of the tree so the leaves are orange or the bark is purple, for example. We can't do that. It's a replaced element. Having said that, we work with replaced elements a lot when creating web pages. We constantly load up images. We often have media in the form of videos. We sometimes need to load iframes from other sources. So we need to be familiar with how to work with replaced elements in CSS. So let's imagine you're building a website for a company. I like to imagine this kind of thing happens all of the time and the boss of the company says, this is your job. And it's something that really doesn't make a lot of sense. We have two containers here on this page. You can see them at the top of the HTML page. We have two rectangular containers. Your job is to take this video of the cat and take the picture of the tree and put them inside the containers. Now, I'm really hoping just looking at this that you can see what the obvious problem is. You take a moment, look at the size of those containers, take another moment to look at the cat video, the dimensions of that, and also of the tree. Something doesn't quite gel here. Ideally, what we'd be able to do, we see our two containers there over on the left, container 1, container 2, is we'd be able to just take this image of the tree and paste that inside the second container and refresh the page. Well, okay, job done, right? Not exactly, as you can see, the tree is currently overflowing the container. So the first thing that we would do is actually set a more appropriate width and height for the tree. So we can see that the width and height of the container, width 400, height 200. So let's set the dimensions of the tree to the same as the dimensions for the container. Okay, now the tree fits inside the container, but we've lost our aspect ratio. So that tree is stretched horizontally. The tree was obviously quite a narrow structure and it's been placed inside a wide container. So here's what you need to know for working with replaced elements. We have two main properties. We have object fit and object position. So let's style object fit on this image. First of all, we have contain. Let's see what happens. So contain is going to render the image as large as possible while still maintaining its aspect ratio and making sure that none of the image is clipped. So we have our entire tree there in that container. The next option we can make use of is cover. Let's see what happens here. So in this case, the image is filling the entire container, but it's also maintaining its aspect ratio. So the end result of that is that some of the image is going to be clipped. The final value is fill. So we can see that the image is taking up the entire container. The image is not being clipped. So we see the full image there. But of course, the byproduct of that is now the aspect ratio of the image is being messed up. Now, which of these is the right option? It's really up to you. It depends what you've been asked to do or what you think the best end result is. There could be a different answer depending on the context. Okay, so let's see if we can do the same for this cat video. We can see this element has an ID of cat. In fact, cat video is the ID of this element. So let's use this ID selector, cat video. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set the width and the height of this video. And we want it to match our container element. So width is 400 pixels. And height is 200 pixels. Next thing we're going to do before we refresh the page is we're going to cut all of that video HTML and we're going to paste it into container 1. Let's have a look at the end result. Now, it was kind of obvious that this was going to happen. because we're trying to fit a narrow video, probably taken on a mobile phone, inside a very wide container, we have this letterbox effect where we have blank space to the left and right of the video. Once again, we can make use of the object fit property on the video. So let's just try our options out with the video. So let's try contain first of all. That is pretty much the same. Let's try cover. So now we get a zoomed in video in this case. So it's making sure that entire element is being covered. And it really depends what you need the video for. If it was just some kind of background effect, it might not be a problem that all of the video has been clipped off at the top and bottom. But if the focus here is the video, then this is obviously not acceptable because now the user can't see the entire video and what's happening here in this case. Let's try fill. So now we can see the whole video is there, but it's been mangled to fit inside this very wide container. So we have distorted aspect ratio, unfortunately. So difficult to say whether this is looking like a cat or more like some kind of cat alien. So this is probably not the desired effect, but again, you've got this option if you did need it in a specific context. Now let's set this to contain. And now let's think about our second property, which is object position. And this can simply be given values such as top, right, left. For example, if we set object position left, let's see what happens. Well, now the video part itself loads up over on the left-hand side. This is probably more useful in the context of images, which we'll get to shortly. And let's try object position right. And of course, we have other options as well, such as object position top, which is going to center it, but obviously seeing as this particular video takes up the entire height of the container anyway, then top and bottom don't really make sense in this context. So we should be able to do the same with our image as well. Let's set an object position property. Let's try object position left. We can see now the tree renders over on the left-hand side of the container. Now, just so we can try out the other values for object position, let's create a new container. We'll call it container 3. And we have a much smaller image here. I'm going to paste that in. And let's set some parameters for container 3. So we're going to style the container 3 class. And let's set this to be fairly large. So we'll give it a width of 800 pixels and a height of 800 pixels. And so we can see the container. We'll also give it a border, solid 1 pixel black. Okay, so let's just grab the ID of our image. So the ID is cheaters in this case. Now it might appear that we can just immediately use object position and specify right, for example. And we see something does happen, but the image is still very small up in the top left of that container. So what's going on here? Well, we still need to set a width and height on the image itself, and the size of that image should be the same as the size of the container. Now, it might seem a bit counterintuitive because obviously the image is much smaller than the size of the container. But the point is that size we specify on the image is the space that we're giving the replaced element to work in. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the resultant size of the image. The resultant size of the image is actually going to be determined by object fit property and the position by object position. But we still need to specify the size of available space. So what is the size of the container? It's 800 by 800. So let's specify width, 800 pixels, and height, 800 pixels. So you can see initially, the element does take up the full size of the container, but that's why we set object fit. So if we set object fit contain, well, now it doesn't take up the full size of the container. At least it doesn't take up the full width of the container, but it does take up the full height of the container. Now bear in mind that this image is something like 220 pixels tall, but it's occupying an 800 pixel container. So what we're ending up with here is an image that's been stretched and it's going to end up looking like a low quality image. Now undoubtedly object position is going to work, but this is potentially not what we want because we have this low quality grainy image. So we can also make use of the object fit scale down. And this is either going to use contain or it's going to just use the original size of the image, whichever is smallest. So now we can see the image is at its original size, which is fairly small, and it should respond now to object position. So you can see that width and height it's really just the size of the space that the image has to move around in. It doesn't necessarily indicate the size of the image itself. We can also provide two values here, for example, bottom right. So you can see we can set this image anywhere we want within this 800 by 800 container. And we can also use percentage values as well, pretty much similar to background image, where we're able to say, for example, 25%, 50%. Let's see what happens here. So we can see the image is now 25% from the left, but 50% from the top. Now, since scale down picks between contain and none, whichever's smallest, logically, if we set object fit none, then it doesn't resize the image at all. But notice that that is not the default option. So by default, it's making use of object fit fill. So if we were to set that property and value, object fit fill, we won't see any difference to the image because this is what it was by default. So you see, when we set width and height on the image, by default, the image will take up that size, but that's only because object fit is set to fill by default. If object fit is set to none, then the image doesn't actually scale, and that width and height just refers to the width and the height of the container for this replaced element, the image in this case. All right, hopefully you understand a little bit more about what a replaced element is in CSS and how to style it. Thanks very much for watching. Catch you in the next part of the course.